Hi everyone, so today I'm going to talk about our second assignment and we're going to be covering composition and concept. This particular assignment is going to focus more on composition and then we're going to touch a little bit on concept illustration. If you take Sophomore II with me next semester, then we'll go a little bit more in depth with concept illustration, but for now we're just going to kind of introduce it. So I'm going to go over a slideshow presentation that I made, and the PDF will be in Canvas so you can look at it later. But for now, I'm going to go through it and explain it and give you some overview. So composition refers to the placement, arrangement, or organization of elements in an artwork. Basically, the format of the illustration is the composition. Scale, depth, and placement all affect the mood, movement, and effectiveness of your image. So all of the elements in your image help to create a certain arrangement. When we talk in critique, we'll talk about how our eye moves around an image. And our eye is drawn to certain things. As we become aware of that as illustrators, we can affect how the audience sees the image. So the way that we utilize how big an object is, how dark it is, and where we place them within the canvas, that all affects the way that we read the image and how we read the message. So I'm going to talk about compositional styles and different ways that image makers can create a composition in an image. The first one is triangular balance. So this creates a sense of balance with a stable geometric structure. As you can see here, this image by Norman Rockwell, the way that the woman is standing, it creates almost a triangular shape. This image also has a sense of movement as she leans forward, and it creates this diagonal shape that then comes down from her head to her foot and then back. And part of the success of this image is that it keeps our eye moving around the image. There's many details, but they're all structured in a way that first we see her face, and then we start to look at the other things in the image. Because things are placed almost in the shape of a triangle, similar to a circle, it keeps our eye going from one point to another. And this is also part of a principle called hierarchy. When we are looking at an image, we look at one thing first, and then the second most noticeable thing second, and so on. And again, that can be controlled by size, shape, contrast, and value. Next is symmetrical balance. This is also known as formal balance. It creates equal weight and importance on both sides of the image. This is not a very popular composition because it can be boring or predictable. However, I think Maxfield Parrish has done a successful job of creating an image that is interesting but also well balanced. Each figure has equal weight within the image, and we're still drawn to the focal point of the image, which is the ham. This is an advertisement for Swiss premium ham, and so the composition draws our eye going right to the center where the focal point is. Here we have asymmetrical balance. So this image becomes really exciting. There's a lot of movement, and because the composition is at an angle, it just creates a lot of interest. But at the same time, there is a sense of balance. The weight is distributed through different elements on both sides of the piece. This is another example of asymmetrical balance. So as the previous slide says, one side may have a single prominent element that is balanced with smaller pieces that are equal in weight. So like in this second example, we can see that the face has a lot of weight. It's the main focal point, but it's balanced out by these smaller shapes that create a pattern around it. Next, we have radial composition. And this is when elements in the image radiate from a center or focal point. So radial meaning like a circle. The different elements of the image circle around the main center point. Radial images can feel decorative as opposed to narrative, but I think these are a few interesting examples that do show some interesting narrative elements as well. This image by Sanjay Patel is a really good example of an image that shows a story. It shows the main character being surrounded and gives a sense of insurmountable odds. Next, we have crystallographic balance. I know that's kind of a tricky word. This particular compositional style, it doesn't have one particular focal point. It feels more like a pattern or organized chaos, but there's many different parts of this image that has details, and so your eye is constantly moving around and looking at different parts of the image. This is another example. This crowd of people, there's not any one particular person that you necessarily look at first. You kind of see all of them together as a pattern. Next, I'm going to talk about some compositional tools. So these are some other things to keep in mind when you're arranging a composition. You may have heard of the rule of thirds or the golden mean. The rule of thirds breaks an image into a grid to check balance, and it keeps the main elements lined up with the intersecting points of the grid. So you may have seen this graph before. Basically, it creates a focal point where there's more detail and things come together in one spot, or where there might be more contrast. So here with the rule of thirds, you also see how this graph is. It kind of points out different places where this focal point might be. So there's 4 different points where the main focal point could be. So here in this image by Janin, she's created a window that you actually kind of can see a grid within her image with the window panes, but your eye is drawn to where the focal point is with the radio. And again, it kind of, because there's this weight there, your eye wants to go to the brightest part of the image first and then travel around and look at the other elements of the image. Another effective tool is cropping. Cropping an image can change the balance or the movement of a piece. Sometimes it's effective to show a whole scene, but other times it might be more effective to focus on one part and to really zoom into where the action is. And I think this example by Laura Callahan is really a good example of how cropping can be effective. It puts us right in where the action of the soccer player is. Similarly, with this image by Celia Jacobs, we don't see the whole beach. We just see what's important. We see the surfer, the surfboard, and the wave. That's all that we need to see. We don't need to have a whole beach scene with all these different things going on. You can. It depends on what you're going for. But I think that this is a nice example of cropping. So when you're looking at putting an illustration together, you might consider cropping to the most interesting part of your sketch. Okay, we're going to talk about point of view. So changing the camera angle can shift the composition and the mood of your image. It can make it so much more interesting. Instead of showing an image straight on and just seeing the foreground and the background straight at the level of your eye, it can be really interesting to shift your eye from being above like you're a bird or on the ground like you're a worm. So in this image, we have a bird's eye view. We're looking down from above, and it creates a really interesting image. In this image, we're looking up, and we're able to see more of the universe that this character lives in. You might also consider a fisheye lens. A fisheye lens is when the camera angle, if you will, is exaggerated. So both of the sides pull back and the center of the image becomes the largest exaggerated point. So when we look at this image, we see the soccer ball and that emphasis of the kick, and then everything else is exaggerated backwards. Another helpful tool is leading lines. Shapes, paths, and lines can help lead the viewer's eye through the image. Just like in this image of leaves, the character is sweeping the leaves and she leads us through the maze of leaves. Directionality is helpful, especially when we're trying to read an image. The direction a character is facing can tell us about where they're going and how successful their journey might be. So keep in mind that the Western eye is trained to read an image from left to right. So with this angel, we see her moving upwards and to the right. And so that might tell us that her journey will be successful. Whereas if she were moving to the left or if she were moving down, we might insinuate that her journey is going to be a little perilous. Creating a diagonal line or a diagonal horizon, it just makes the piece a lot more interesting. And it changes, again, from having that head-on view. Things are just a little bit more interesting. I love this example by Jake Wyatt. He's shifted the horizon line so it's diagonal, and we can see that this character is facing obstacles. She's looking down and she's being met with her enemy. So the illustrator can give us a lot of clues into what is happening in an image just by the way that they compose the elements contained in the picture. Okay, our last tool is being aware of how many of an object there is and what is pleasing to the eye. So our eyes actually like odd numbers. It's not necessarily always a solution, but it just mixes things up a little bit. It's not quite so perfectly even. So it can be more pleasing to have an odd number of objects or characters in a group of subjects. So we're going to talk a little bit about concept. So concept, the definition is it's an abstract idea. And when illustrators are creating an image, especially in this case when we talk about editorial illustration, so this is illustrations that are typically used in magazines or in newspapers. They're taking an abstract idea and they're trying to make it easy to understand. So we're going to look at some examples here, and we're going to think about how do image makers visually represent difficult ideas and concepts and make them understandable. So in our first example, we're looking at this image called Meltdown, and it's very simple. We're taking a complicated story that has a lot of details in it, but it's really boiled down into what is the most important. We have the character, and we understand immediately what's happening to them. Again, just because a concept may be complicated, it doesn't mean that the image needs to be complicated. So this article is about a woman's fear of losing her Jewish identity when changing her name through marriage. So again, we see these symbols that go straight to the point of the story. A woman is changing her name, so we literally have a pen writing on paper. And then we have the Star of David, which symbolizes her heritage. It can be easy to move into cliches. So thinking about how you can show a symbol in a new way is really important in creating an original idea. In this image, they're depicting childhood obesity. Again, this particular image, the idea maybe isn't super original, but the style is done well. And so that can be important too. If the idea is a little cliche, then make sure that your technique and your style is super interesting. I think this is another really great example of editorial. The idea is working on vacation. So you just literally see a woman doing something that's associated with vacationing, but she's on her laptop doing that work. So we boiled it down to the most important things. This work by Chris Bazzelli, I think, is a successful piece. The idea is focusing on bright spots. Sometimes you can take the idea of a concept and boil it down even more. So this piece is for CFO, which is probably a magazine about finances. So this article really is probably about anything related to finances. So it says the year ahead is an article about new opportunities in the current economy. So you may think about having a bunch of dollar signs, but you don't have to. You don't have to use those symbols, and you don't necessarily have to be so direct and obvious. I really like this example because it shows the real idea and the concept that he's focusing on is the year ahead and capturing the feeling of optimism in the year ahead, and obviously showing that there's opportunity even though it seems like there might not be, you can tell with all of the dead trees around. Okay, so I know that we have kind of two different things that we're focusing on for this assignment. This assignment really is more focused on composition and just focusing on creating a successful image, considering the different elements of your piece. We're not even going to be working with color, so that won't be a distraction. This will be a black and white image. The image that you're making will be for an editorial assignment, but we're not going to be overly focused on that aspect. We're more focused on just creating a successful composition. So you can look at the assignment sheet in Canvas and look over the details there and the requirements. The assignment sheet will contain your editorial prompts. And then this PDF with these images will also be there, so you can look over it again and see the notes contained there. All right, good luck.